All right. So, hello, I'm Eva Goldfinger. I'm a rabbi in Toronto. I'm thrilled to be here. And I'm so glad that all of you whom I cannot see are also here. So, let me start off this way. Nathan Osabel, who's a historian, a folklorist, and a humorist, said that Jewish humor is not just laughter, it is in fact wisdom. So today when we come together to learn, it seems appropriate to somehow bring humor in to add to our wisdom. I'll be talking about the agenda of Jewish humor. Let's make sure first that we are all talking about the same thing. So what exactly is humor? Webster's dictionary describes humor as the mental faculty of discovering, expressing, or appreciating the ludicrous or absurdly incongruous. In other words, the purpose of humor is to mess with your mind and make you laugh with or at the sharer of the humor or the subject of the humor. But if humor's only purpose is to make you laugh, then I wouldn't have used the word agenda, which means a whole program, an arrangement, a scheme. So humor is a conspiracy by its sharers to spread ideas of information that is ludicrous, etc. But ludicrous isn't just amusing. It also means laughable or ridiculous or worthy of scorn, because what is being said can be false. I see. So humor can be roguish or villainous, deliberately spreading falsehoods with the intention to harm, or its intention could be to alert your mind to something you need to question. So therefore it's iconoclastic. It makes your mind think against the grain or what is conventional or accepted. The fact that it's incongruous or not harmonious or potentially inconsistent with reality, now that's something we as secular humanistic Jews know all too well to question. If it's not rational or scientific, it's ludicrous or humorous. But here's the important thing. Not everyone has the same sense of humor. What one person finds funny, another finds laughable. As humanists, let's always keep in mind when it comes to humor that we don't have to find it funny. We can just shrug and walk away. But when it's villainous, then we need to speak out against it. Why? Because the sad thing about common sense, as you all know, that it's not particularly common. And it can be extremely harmful when people, and sadly too many of them, buy into the false and often hateful messages that can be spread via humor. It's too easy to say, just kidding. Are we on the same page? Good. Then let me just share with you the different types of humor, what makes humor Jewish, and what are the main features of Jewish humor, and then we'll review and do an expansion of the angles, or not the angles, but the agendas that we'll cover during this talk. So the main types of humor. Number one, we all know jokes. They're compact narratives that make a strong point via surprise. Even in the Bible, Sarah laughed at how ludicrous it was to imagine she could become pregnant at her age, and Isaac was named for that laughter, even though God is the one who said that. Second is wit. This is intellectual wordplay. It can be understatements, exaggerations. The Agadic section of the Talmud are full of witty asides and repartees. In one of the most well-known Talmud stories, the rabbis were arguing about a point of law. And one of the rabbis was so frustrated that despite numerous points of evidence of his correctness, the other three would not believe him. So he finally called upon God to tell them, and God did. But the rabbis ruled that not God in heaven decided what was correct, but a democratic majority rule. And when the rabbis were asked, so how did God respond to this? They said God laughed that his children had bested him. Here's a contemporary example of wit. An enterprising rabbi is offering circumcisions via the internet. The service is called e-moil. Well, this is not villainous. It's just poking fun at the rabbis or the mohel. Now, both religious and secular Jews may find this funny because it makes them both feel smarter than the subject of the humor. Its agenda is to laugh while you build your self-esteem. So now we've discovered one agenda. But note that those who are passionately opposed to circumcision may actually believe that rabbis and mohels who perform them are idiots. So their agenda would be to ridicule the rabbi and the mohel. Now, wit comes in multiple forms. One is the proverb. Listen to this Jewish Buddhist proverb. Be aware of your body. Be aware of your perceptions. Keep in mind that not every physical sensation is a symptom of a terminal illness. What could be the agenda of this? It's essentially to criticize Jewish hypochondria. But listen, as Jews throughout much of our history, our lives were so precarious that we embedded in our DNA, it seems, a tendency towards natural worrying. We've also encoded a way to reduce the damage done by the stress of inner worry by spewing it out. We've come to call this genetic adaptation kvetching or whining. So we feel better, but stress everyone else out around us. So remember that not every mutation has net positive consequences. Now look at the consequences of the children of Israel constantly kvetching about how difficult the trek in the desert was towards the promised land. They baked and worshipped a golden calf and were punished by having to wander in the desert for 40 long years till that first generation died out. We did, however, learn an important lesson from that long trek, and that is that even while they were kvetching, let's say the children of Israel had lots of, we'll call it, good times, because in under 40 years, they managed to have so many children that they completely replaced themselves. All right, another kind of wit are quotes. George Burns said, happiness is having a large, loving, caring, close-knit family in another city. So what's the agenda of this? It recognizes the importance of love and caring while at the same time realizing that bonds can often bind us, restrict us, and even overpower us. The usual jokes about helicopter parenting. Okay, another type is riddles. Here's one. Who was the greatest comedian in the Torah? And the answer? Samson, of course. He brought the house down. What's the agenda of this? Interestingly, it teaches us our literature and therefore familiarizes us with our foundational culture. Two other types of humor are satire, which poke fun at the weaknesses and foolishness of others, and sarcasm, which can be hurtful. Now note the sarcasm of biblical prophet Elijah, who was taunting the prophets of Baal, the competitor god for Yahweh. He says, cry aloud, for he is a god. Either he is talking, or he's pursuing, or he's on a journey, or perchance he sleepeth and must be awakened. That's a little nasty thing to say about the other god. All right, so these four types of jokes or humor are verbal humor. They're usually culturally based, so we call them insider humor. Sharing insider jokes cuts the pain of being a perpetual outsider. Four other types of humor are slapstick, buffoonery, mimicry, and practical jokes. These are physical or action humor. They're usually very childish, and their agenda is hilarity and fun, and it makes us obviously feel smarter than those idiots who are doing these jokes. Finally, the last one that I'll be dealing with today are farce and parody. This is a combination of both verbal and physical humor. This became very popular in around the Middle Ages as part of the Purim rituals of the Purim spiel, like the Purim plays, the dress-ups, the mocking of figures of power, like rabbis and kings, and so on. All right, so let's move on to what makes humor Jewish. It's Jewish if it's of or about Jews, or the Jewish community and civilization. So it's social, religious, cultural, and political life. Also, it mirrors the history of the Jews. It's a reflection of their joys, anguish, hopes, discouragements, and often their yearnings for a world of justice and equality where they fit in, but just rise a little bit above it. Here's a joke about the Holocaust. It was Hitler's birthday and a time for celebration throughout Germany. In a classroom, a teacher was addressing her pupils. Our beloved Führer is more than just a leader. He is like our father. Now just suppose that he really was your father and you could have anything you wish. What would you want most for yourself? I would ask him to make me a general, shouted one boy. A stormtrooper, yelled another. An orphan, shouted little Moishi. Jewish humor. Also, if it's told from a Jewish perspective, like this one. Osama bin Laden is talking to Yasser Arafat, and he says, listen, there's something that I need to discuss with you because I don't understand it. We are both terrorists. We both killed thousands of innocent people, but all over the world, they're hunting only for me while you won the Nobel Prize for Peace. What is your secret? Oh, it's very simple, responded Arafat. I kill only Jews. Oi. We see a lot of hostility and clear anti-Semitism in this joke. Is it Jewish? Think why or why not. We'll talk about this perhaps later. Okay. Let me discuss the varying features of Jewish humor. Number one is a continuation of societal leveling from the prophetic tradition. So it deflates the pomposity of the ego or the high and the mighty. Also, it erases the lines between the haves and the have-nots. Like the prophets, also this type of humor takes people to task for their failings. The second feature is the legalistic Talmudic tradition. Jews sharpened their wits on the logistical grindstone of Talmud, so Jewish humor is full of intellectual wit. This tradition is also full of arguing, which continues till this day. We argue with everyone, including God. Listen to this one. After months of negotiating with the authorities, a Talmudist from Odessa was finally granted permission to visit Moscow. He boarded the train and found an empty seat. At the next stop, a young man got on and sat next to him. The scholar looked at the young man and he thought, this fellow doesn't look like a peasant, so if he's not a peasant, he's probably from this district. If he comes from this district, then he must be Jewish because this is, after all, a Jewish district. But on the other hand, since he's a Jew, where could he be going? I'm the only one or the only Jew in this district who has permission to travel to Moscow. Ah, wait, just outside Moscow, there's a little village called Samvet, and Jews don't need special permission to go to Samvet. But why would he travel to Samvet? He's surely going to visit one of the Jewish families there. But how many Jewish families are there in Samvet? Aha, only two. The Bernsteins and the Steinbergs. But since the Bernsteins are a terrible family, such a nice Jewish fella, he's probably visiting the Steinbergs. But why is he going to the Steinbergs in Samvet? The Steinbergs have only daughters, 2 of them. So maybe he's their son-in-law. But if he is, then which daughter did he marry? They say that Sarah Steinberg married a nice lawyer from Budapest, and Esther married a businessman from Zhytomyr. So it must be Sarah's husband, which means that his name is Alexander Cohen, if I'm not mistaken. But if he came from Budapest, with all the anti-Semitism they have there, he must have changed his name. What's the Hungarian equivalent of Cohen? Ah, yes, it's Kovacs. But since they allowed him to change his name, he must have special status to change it. What could it be? Ah, it must be a doctorate from the university. Nothing less would do. At this point, therefore, the scholar of Talmud turns to the young man and says, "And how do you do, Dr. Kovacs?" "Very well, thank you, sir, for asking," answered the startled co-passenger. "But how is it that you know my name, although we have never met, or so it seems to me?" "Ah," replied the Talmudist, "it was obvious." All right, so what do we see here? This not only teaches history, info about the political situation in Russia and anti-Semitism of the times, but the message here is that Jews are clever and they can figure things out, of course, from the generations of Talmudic pilpul, or this dancing on the head of a pin. But also it shows the result of being forced to live together in crowded Jewish areas, so the Jews have come to know everybody's business. You know what they say? They ask, what's the business, or what business is a yenta in? And the answer is yours. All right. Another form is krechetz, or the groan, the whine, or the complaint. We call it the bittersweet grumbling of Jewish ethos. We have a modern version of that too. And we have not so much reason to be bitter, except perhaps now. So the waiter says to a group of Jewish women in the restaurant, "So ladies, is anything all right?" So we don't seem to be able to get over our history of deprivation. Which brings me to merciless self-deprecation. Freud, in his Wit and its Relation to the Unconscious, said that this really is innate self-hatred of the Jews against their own Jewishness. So they've projected so much self-hatred, or so much hatred of the Jews into us, it's gone inside. I'm not so sure I agree with him. Okay, Theodore Reich, or Reich, however you want to pronounce it, he said this is really pseudo-masochistic because it's a mask. What the Jew really wants is approval of others. So he says, "See how full of weaknesses and failings I am, therefore recognize my humanity, forgive me, and love me again." Not so sure I agree with Theodore either. Henry Spalding has a totally different perspective. He says that this shows the moral and intellectual courage of the Jewish people to recognize their own human foibles and frailties, thus ridiculing their self and having zero fear of ridiculing it in others as well. Now listen to what Dr. Martin Grotchan says in his Psychoanalysis and the Jewish Joe. Hope I pronounced that correctly. He says it begins with aggression. We come up with a shocking thought and an offensive statement that goes with that thought, and we disguise it by turning it against the Jews themselves, or what he calls the introjection of external hostility. That's what leads to self-mockery, and I'm more inclined to agree with him. Self-humiliation is also a very important measure of self-defense to protect against grave dangers. See, I'm not so threatening, I'm frail and laughable, so that those who were opposed to the Jews wouldn't kill us. Or we could be saying, see, you don't need to attack us because we're much better at it than you. Look at this relatively modern story of a yeshiva rowing team. Yeshiva University, which is an Orthodox university, decided to field a rowing team. Unfortunately, they lost race after race. They practiced and practiced for hours every day, but never managed to come in any better than dead last. Finally, the Rosh Yeshiva, or the head of the yeshiva, said, "Okay, I'm sending Yankel to spy on the championship Harvard team." So Yankel schlepped off to Cambridge and hid in the bushes of the Charles River, from where he carefully watched the Harvard team as they practiced. After 2 weeks, he finally returned to the yeshiva and says, "Hey, I figured it out." What? Tell us already. They all wanted to know. "We've been doing it wrong," said Yankel. "We should only have one guy shouting instructions while the other 8 row." So who could have made up this joke? We could say that this is a criticism by Hasidim, or the pietists, of the rabbinic intellectualism. Their heads are so full of the minutiae of rules and study that they can't even figure out the simple practical things. On the other hand, we could say that this is a criticism of the secular against the religious, because they're just a bunch of fools. They all think they're right all the time, and every Jew is a president. Okay, you can decide for yourself. Now, we also balance this self-humiliation with paranoid superiority, or what we call one-upmanship. And let me share with you a short story about one-upmanship. Back in the time of the samurai, there was a powerful emperor who needed a new head samurai. So he sent out a declaration throughout the country that he was searching for one. A year passed and only 3 people showed up: a Japanese, a Chinese, and a Jewish samurai. The emperor asked the Japanese samurai to come in and demonstrate why he should be the head. The Japanese samurai opened a matchbox, and out popped a bumblebee. Whoosh went his sword, and the bumblebee dropped dead on the ground in 2 pieces. The emperor exclaimed, "That is impressive." The emperor then asked the Chinese samurai to come in and demonstrate his skills. The Chinese samurai also opened a matchbox, and out buzzed a fly. Whoosh, whoosh went his sword, and the fly dropped dead on the ground in 4 small pieces. The emperor exclaimed, "That is really very impressive." The emperor then had the Jewish samurai demonstrate why he should be the head. The Jewish samurai also opened a matchbox, and out flew a gnat. His flashing sword went whoosh, whoosh, but the gnat was still alive and flying around. The emperor, obviously disappointed, asked, "After all that, why is the gnat not dead?" The Jewish samurai smiled. "Well," he replied, "circumcision is not meant to kill." All right, self-aggrandizement. Look how amazing we are. We can beat them at their own game. Note also that the Japanese are the least adept, while the Chinese and the Jews are better. So this is clearly a put down of the Japanese. Now, today, much of Jewish humor is entwined in mainstream humor, since in the 20th century, many, or some say most, of the movers and shakers of American humor industry, both Hollywood, New York, Borscht Belt, etc., were Jews. I haven't counted the numbers. So let's review and expand on what is the purpose or agenda of Jewish humor. Number 1, it's to understand ourselves and others. Since we often don't censor humor, it vividly portrays the Jewish psyche. It's a mechanism that is particularly sensitive to inner tensions, to reveal conflicted selves, things we normally deny. So it leads to self-awareness, which hopefully leads to self-analysis, and self-criticism, which hopefully leads to changing ourselves. Number 2, it's a great distraction, which helps us cope with, or helped us for a long time, to cope with poverty, persecution, oppression, and loss of power. Very importantly, loss of power, because psychology shows us that when people lose power, it leads to anger. And anger can be a dangerous form of responding to things when we want to make changes. Listen to this little story. It was in 1872 in Russia, and a Jewish community was abuzz. They heard that a Christian girl was just found murdered, and they feared that once again, the Jews would be blamed and it would result in a pogrom. The community met at the shul to discuss strategy when Shloime, the butcher's son, runs in yelling, "Good news, we're saved! The murdered girl was Jewish!" Oy, this is called gallows humor, also reflecting the history and this anti-Semitism of the time. Very importantly, humor helps us to alter our perspectives, and it enables us to be accepting of what is and what we cannot change. Therefore, it reduces our suffering. And this was very important for a very long time during the difficult times for Ashkenazi and Sephardi Jews. There's a story of a man who went to see his Rebbe for advice because his house was too small and crowded. So the Rebbe gave him the advice. He says, "Why don't you bring one of your cows into the house? And the next week, come back and tell me what you think." Oh, it was terrible with that cow there. And the next week he comes back hoping for some better advice. And the rabbi says, "You know what? You should take 3 goats and you should bring them into the house with you. And come back in a week and tell me how it went." This was awful. I can't tell you how awful it was. There was no room for anything. The bleeding, the shitting, it was terrible. And a week later he came back hoping to get some relief. And the rabbi says, "Bring 10 chickens into the house and come back in 1 week and we'll see what we'll do then." I don't even need to tell you, nothing could have been worse. There was no relief whatsoever. Finally, he comes to the rabbi after this horrible, horrible week, and the rabbi says to him, "You know what I think? I think you should remove all the animals from your house." And he did. And guess what? Now the house was so spacious, there was room for everybody. You're going to wonder what the agenda of this thing is. So let me explain it to you clearly. It touts the wisdom of the Rebbe and how important it is not to question what he advises, even if it seems totally ridiculous. It also teaches the very important lesson of changing your perspective and being grateful for what you have. As they say in Yiddish, "Es kann alt sein ärger, it can always be worse." We also see this in contemporary North American humor. Look at this short example. "So Sally, how is your son David doing?" "Don't ask. He's living in Toronto. There it's legal, so he married a guy called Pasquale." "Oy, Sally, my heart goes out to you. That is so terrible." "Yeah, I know. Why couldn't he find a nice Jewish boy?" So here we see the issue is intermarriage and the constant kvetching, of course, and having to get used to things. Okay, when we poke fun, which is a very common form, especially during difficult times, the agenda of poking fun and diminishing others became particularly popular. It was our war strategy, which we called words like arrows. It allows us to retain our dignity when we are humiliated. It makes us feel superior. So for example, religious against the non-religious and vice versa. And it makes the other less threatening. In the 19th century, we see the development beginning in Europe and Russia of brilliant writers who wrote jokes, stories, and plays that became popular and continued to be so even in the New World when supposedly stuff has changed for the Jews. So we have writers like Herschel Ostropoler, Mendel Moicher Sforim, Shalom Aleichem, Yitzchak Leib Peretz, and Abraham Goldfaden, to mention just a few. They were notorious for making fun, particularly of people they exhibited as fools. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Chelm stories. So here's a more modern example that I shared this week at the CSJO conference. So if you were there, feel free to run for a quick bathroom break now. It's called The Bet. A lawyer and a white bearded Hasidic man are sitting next to each other on a long flight from Toronto via New York to London, England. The lawyer is thinking that Hasidim are so dumb that he could get one over on them easily. So he asks the Hasid if he would like to play a fun game. The Torontonian Hasid is tired and just wants to take a nap, so he politely declines and tries to catch a few winks. The lawyer persists and says that the game is a lot of fun. I ask you a question, and if you don't know the answer, you pay me only $5. You ask me a question, and if I don't know the answer, you pay me $500. Well, this catches the Hasidic man's attention because he's got lots of family to feed. And to keep the lawyer quiet, he agrees to play the game. The lawyer asks the first question. What's the distance from the earth to the moon? The Chassid shrugs, reaches into his pocket, pulls out a Canadian $5 bill, and hands it to the American lawyer. To himself, he thinks, good thing Canadian dollars are worth less than the American money, so I've got him already. Now it's the Chassid's turn. He asks the lawyer, what goes up a hill with 3 legs and comes down with 4? The lawyer is stumped. So he uses his laptop and searches all reference that he could find on the internet, and he sends email to all his smart friends, all to no avail. After an hour of searching, he finally gives up. He wakes up the Hasidic man and hands him 500 American bucks. The Chassid pockets what is the equivalent of 700 Canadian dollars and happily goes back to sleep. The lawyer's going nuts, not knowing the answer. He wakes up the Chassid and asks, well, so what goes up the hill with 3 legs and comes down with 4? The Chassid shrugs, reaches into his pocket, hands the lawyer $5 and goes back to sleep, $690 richer. So here we see the clear stereotyping between secular and religious Jews and the common outwitting of the other, but this time the other is within your community. If you had to guess which viewpoint created this joke, you could say either. The Hasidim are thinking they think they're smarter because they have a fancy university education, but nothing beats the brilliance created by hundreds of generations of Talmudic study. The seculars assume they are smarter because of their education, but this is a good learning experience in humility. That is not what you know, but how you use what you know that determines how smart you are. All right, onwards. Jokes also diminish or transcend our fear, so it enables us to adapt to changing situations and enables us to take action because, as you know, that fear can paralyze us. It entertains and cheers us up, which is in and of itself a fabulous agenda. Very importantly, it popularizes Jewish culture and good feelings or pride around that culture, especially when others are busy diminishing it. It teaches us our values and what's important. And very importantly for some, it reinforces our faith or beliefs. I hope that by helping us laugh a little and learn a little, I have contributed to Tikkun Leil Shavuot, or the repair of the world through this COVIDic time. So I'll stop now in case you have questions or want to share something. And I've left a collection of other examples of humor if you don't have any questions, and I'll let my co-hosts indicate whether you have any questions or comments.
So there was a question, Marty Hirsch wanted to know whether she could have a copy of your talk.
Sure.
Okay, so you can send it to me.
I will.
Okay. Gary Zarno had his hand up a very long time ago. So if Gary, you want to write in the chat or the Q&A, I'll give Eva the question. And if anybody else wants to ask a question, just put it in one of those 2 places.
Or share their ideas about what they think the agendas of Jewish humor are. All of us are very open to learning more because in this short period of time, I really couldn't share everything that I know.
I want you to tell more jokes.
I have more jokes.
I know.
Anybody else? Should I tell a joke in the meantime?
Sure.
So this is a Herschel Osterpuller story. One night, some thieves broke into Herschel's house. They searched, they looked high and low, and turned the house topsy-turvy, but found nothing. Meanwhile, Herschel's wife heard the strangers prowling through the house. She began to tremble and quietly nudged Herschel. Herschel, wake up. I'm not asleep. Don't you hear? There are thieves in the house. Shh, said Herschel. Be quiet, I'm burning with shame. There isn't even anything for them to steal. This shows the pride of poverty-stricken, loss of dignity. Any questions? Nothing? Okay, so I've got a little bit more time, and if more questions come in, you'll stop me, okay?
Well.
Here, they're building Chelm's synagogue. The town of Chelm decided to build a new synagogue. So some strong, able-bodied men were sent to a mountainside to gather stones for the foundation, right to the top of the mountain. The men put the stones on their shoulders and trudged down the mountain to the town below. When they arrived, the town constable yelled, "Foolish men, you should have rolled the stones down the mountain." The men agreed that this was indeed an excellent idea. So they turned around with the stones still on their shoulders, trudged up the mountain, and rolled the stones back down. We certainly can see the agenda here, poking fun at fools.
So Judy Stark wants to know, of all the different types of humor, which do you think is the highest form?
I don't know what she means by highest, which I think is the funniest. Often I think that self-deprecating humor is the funniest because it's the saddest, and yet the humor makes it less sad and it enables us to be who we want to be. I don't know if that answers your question, Judy, but you can always phone me later. And ask.
She also complimented you on your presentation.
Thank you. Any other questions, or do you want me to go on to the next joke?
Wait, there's more.
I see, good.
Yeah, Sandy Landau. So many come from Europe, not so many from Canada or US. Have we become so assimilated? I'm not sure what
I don't know what
you're asking.
Assimilated to what? Maybe she can respond to that in her thing and
her chat. I'll look.
Maybe it's the jokes are making reference to a time and place, and that doesn't exist anymore. You know, how does this carry over to today? Do we still see this kind of Jewish humor even today?
So one of the comments that I made before was that Jewish humor has been so assimilated into general North American humor that they often cannot even tell the difference, that these come from the oys and theys of Jewish humor. But there are all types of humor, and there's a whole series of North American type of humor, which is a reflection, like the intermarriage humor, or Jewish American princess humor, or Jewish mother's humor. Those are primarily North American. I would say not that we're so assimilated, but that humor is always a reflection of the lifestyle and the life circumstances of the people who are living in that area. So I didn't put any in here at the moment, but I have a whole series of jokes that are Sephardi jokes, and they are different. Perhaps I don't have time to go looking for it now. I probably could have put one in there too that would have helped you to see that that was a reflection of the lifestyle of the Jews. And some of them were very wealthy Jews, not all poverty-stricken Jews in the Sephardi countries and the Eastern Mizrahi countries. I hope that answers your question. I see we have other questions.
Yeah, so John Levine mentioned that Larry David is modern self-deprecating humor.
Absolutely. I had a whole long list of different types of humorists and the kind of humor they had, but I had limited time, so I didn't want to take up all the time with lists. Instead, I wanted to share some humor with you. Make you laugh in this supposedly...
So our friend Steve Evans from New Zealand asks,
yeah,
did you make any comparison between American Jewish humor and British humor? And he spelled humor correctly both times.
Correctly American way or?
No, correctly your way.
Correctly,
Correctly.
Yes, I would say that American humor is more blatant. It's less gentlemanly than a lot of, like if you take a look at the American British shows and serial shows on TV, you'll probably note that they're ugly but gentlemanly ugly, whereas Jews have no such problem with being very forceful and open about their opinions.
Yeah, I'm
Agree with me, please, Miriam.
Yeah, I'm sure you have a lot of comments on the Catskill humor. You know, those humorists from the Catskills and you know, the men of the early 20th century.
Well, one of the reasons why I didn't include any Catskills humor in here is because so many of them are very sexist. And so I thought, not a good time to be sharing those in the Me Too generation. You know, they're sexist, and a few of them, they were quite racist as well. Like anti-Catholic, anti-white, anti-Christian. Not the kind of humor that is popular to be sharing today.
But an indication of where the Jews were vis-a-vis the dominant culture.
Absolutely. Always, that's always the reflection, which is one of the reasons why I happened to mention Osterpoller and, you know, Sholem Aleichem. These particular writers, despite the period in which they wrote, so in Russia, Europe, and in early America, their humor still, it's so human, not just Jewish, but so human that we still find it hysterical and funny and relevant today. That to me is what brilliant humor is really all about. So it's not, well, you get it.
So there's the chat question or comment. Hello? British humor a la Python, etc., is more raunchy and physical.
Oi, some of that is raunchy and physical, but you should see some of the Jewish humor that's pretty raunchy and pretty physical, especially the modern, and especially in the LGBTQ community. It's hysterical and it's pretty raunchy and it's Jewish humor. So yes and no.
Yeah, so there's a Helm story, and I'll tell it very short, about Shavuot, that the village ran out of sour cream for the blintzes. So the Rebbe, you know, says, well, what are we gonna do? They don't have any sour cream. I have an idea. Why don't we make the water sour cream and the sour cream water? Which was a great idea, as long as you know, we're dealing with putting the water on the blintz. Didn't work so well because it was all drippy, even though it was sour cream. You know, when you change them over, just you have more water, but then it doesn't work because it's not the right consistency. You're looking at me.
Yeah.
Joke teller.
I'm not getting. How do you make?
So you just decide, right? Isn't that what the rabbi does? The rabbi decides. We don't have enough sour cream, so we'll make water sour cream.
So from now on, we'll call water sour cream, and it'll be sour cream. עכשיו אני מבינה.
Okay. I think we've done it.
Have we got time for one more short little?
Yeah.
Okay, this is called the Snoring Business. Two beggars are sitting on a bench in Mexico City. One man is holding a large cross, and the other man is holding a Star of David. Both are holding big hats to collect contributions. People walk by, lift their noses at the man with the Star of David, and almost for spite, drop large amounts of money in the hat of the man who's holding the cross. Soon the hat of the man with the cross is filled, and the hat of the man with the Star of David is still empty. A priest watches and then approaches the man. He turns to the man holding the Star of David and says, "Young man, don't you realize that this is a Catholic country? You'll never get any contributions in this country holding the Star of David." And he walks off. The man with the Star of David turns to the man with the cross and says, "Moshe, can you imagine? This jerk is trying to tell us how to run our business." All right, with that, I want to thank all of you for joining us. And thank you, Miriam and Paul, for running the question.
Our pleasure. Thank you, honey.
You did, in fact, learn something. And I hope you did, in fact, have a laugh, because I can't see you and I can't hear you. So have a good Yontiv and keep learning.